Welcome to the esynergy podcast, conversations that cut through the hype and get to what actually works. I'm Ulrike Eder, Chief Marketing Officer at esynergy, and in each episode, we sit down with business and technology leaders and hear their unfiltered story, the truth and lessons learned behind success and failure, and practical steps that turn big ideas into actual impact. Today, I'm joined by Ben Burdsall, Chief Technology Officer of Dunnhumby, one of the most household and globally recognized names in consumer data science. Dunnhumby is one of the organizations that have helped and shape and define how retailers really serve and understand their customers. And in today's episode, we've got a lot to get through. We're going to talk about the state of retail data. We're going to talk about how Dunnhumby navigates at scale. And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about AI, generative and more traditional, and what really moves the needle. So lots to cover. Ben, great to have you.
Great to be here.
Dive in. So Ben, for people listening, I guess a lot of them will know Dunnhumby from the Tesco Club Card era. Dunnhumby today, how would you describe what you do?
So I think Dunnhumby is quite an interesting company for a couple of reasons. For one, it was founded by a husband and wife couple, Edwina Dunn and Clive Humby. And secondly, they really created an industry. You know, started with a Tesco Club Card and then were fast followers after that, like Nectar. So things you would have interacted with in your everyday life. So what is Dunnhumby trying to do? I think you've got to understand a little bit about the marketplace. It's a three-sided marketplace. So, okay, I want you to picture a triangle. Are you picturing it?
I'm picturing it.
What color is it?
Green.
Green, great. So look at that green triangle. At the top, you have retailers. So they're kind of shops, be it Tesco, be it Walmart, be it John Lewis, any type of retailer. Then down the other apexes, you have the consumer, the customer, the shopper, you know, someone like yourself. And then you have the CPGs, the consumer packaged goods companies. So there could be sort of Coca-Cola, Unilever, Johnson & Johnson, people that make products. Mm-hmm. And the relationship between each one of those apexes or players in the market is quite different. The retailer, for example, is trying to entice and keep customers loyal. So there's a loyalty play. The CPGs, they're trying to hit you with marketing and media so that you know and recognize their brand and, you know, want to buy more of their brand. And finally, the retailer to the CPG. Well, the retailer wants to stock CPGs which are popular on the shelf. So they want to see the performance of each of the brands on the shelves. And here at Dunnhumby, we play in the middle of that, helping each of the parties manage that relationship in the triangle.
That's interesting. And where do you see the biggest tension in that triangle?
I think there's tension everywhere, to be honest. You know, the CPGs are competing each other for aisle space or shelf space. Mm-hmm. They're also competing against themselves, you know, the other brands, you know, with all the marketing and advertising. And finally, you know, you've got the supermarket and grocery is a complex place. You have sort of whole range sort of supermarkets, things like Tesco and Walmart, and then you have the sort of discounters, you know, which sort of don't have the full range but can do volume-based discounting.
What do you think Dunnhumby does better than anyone else?
Well, it really comes back to being consumer or customer oriented. If you think traditionally about sort of data processing systems and tasks, you know, you might think about the days you're in school with an Oracle database or whatever. One of the first things you were doing is sort of adding up totals of sales, right? You know, and yes, there is a use for adding up total sales and products and how much of this and that. But really, if you do that, you don't understand the customer. Every customer becomes transparent and indistinguishable from another customer because you've added up all the totals. What Dunnhumby did was develop systems that really track the profile of the customer individually. So currently today, I think we're tracking about 2.1 billion individual customers.
Wow.
From, you know, the first time they make a purchase to the last time they make a purchase. And you can't aggregate that kind of data because then you lose that customer signal. And I think that's what's really differentiating between our data science and some of our competitors. understanding the customer, not the totality of sales or products.
Yeah, and I mean, you just hinted it, and I wanted to get to that fairly quickly as well. You operate obviously at huge scale. You just mentioned billions of customers, I guess billions of transactions. You're looking at thousands of brands and retailers. From a technology perspective, and I guess in your area, how do you architect systems that actually operate reliably at that scale? How do you look at that? And what team, I guess, do you need to do that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. First of all, I would say we're a cloud-first company. We're 100% public cloud, operating in both GCP and Azure. And I think that's important for two reasons. One, we need to elastically scale, to stretch our infrastructure estate when we have these big processing jobs. And B, it's a recognition that hardware is just a commodity for us. The value for our teams is in the data science, and we don't get very excited about hardware, plugging hardware in, to be honest. In terms of making the system scale, that's a really interesting question. It comes back to that consumer point. Bearing in mind, we have the 2.1 billions of profiles we actively track, week in, week out. I think it equates to something like 24 billion individual data records every week that we process. And when you're processing at that kind of level, spoiler alert, the Oracle databases, or even the really great cloud databases, be these from the hyperscalers or other unpopular brands, doesn't really cut it. Yes, given enough time and compute, and importantly expense, they would be able to do that type of processing, but not in the timescales demanded by our customers, and definitely not at the cost point. So what we've had to done is develop a whole range of systems really at the database level, written in C++, to track the customer signals at the individual level and not make this mistake of aggregating up the totals. So for example, why is this important? We don't really care about how much coffee a supermarket or store has sold in a particular day or week or month. But what we do care about is you as an individual. Have you come back and bought coffee again? Or did you switch brands from your favorite coffee to another coffee? And as soon as you start treating of totalities of customers, you lose those signals. And they're really important for our data science. So we've had to develop everything from scratch, really.
So I think this is quite important because most organizations don't build their own databases anymore. I guess from my perspective, when was the moment where you realized the off-the-shelf solutions that everybody else in the world is using just don't cut it anymore?
Well, we did try, playing with the sort of Oracle accelerators. And I think, and they will work to a certain degree, but it comes back to that problem domain. It comes back to the fact you're tracking individuals, not groups of transactions and totals. And when you start working for some of the largest companies, I mean, Tesco is a very large company, but Walmart is also one of our customers. I mean, they service such a huge proportion of the total population of the world. Then at a certain point, it just becomes, too difficult. You add friction into the system where the customers are, used to have to wait maybe an hour or two even before a particular report was ready. And so, the kind of analogy you would say is like, launch a report, come back and have lunch. And when you come back from lunch, it'll be ready. Then we started using our own proprietary software, what we call accelerators internally. And the first sort of generation of those, it'd be down to 5 or 6 minutes. So the messaging was, you can go and have a cappuccino, but that's about it. And now the next generation, just coming out now, something we call DH Boost, it's down to sort of 1 or 2 minutes. So you've got to pretty well make an espresso before the job's ready. And that is important when you look at the other macro changes in our industry, or every industry, when it comes to AI and interactive queries. People have the attention span of about 5 or 10 seconds. If they ask a chat bot, a question, and we need to go and do that data mining on the fly. If we can't answer it within about 10, 20 seconds, then they've got bored and gone on to something else.
It's interesting because obviously you have everything down to a T, it seems, and very consciously so. Does that leave for your team, does that leave a lot of room for experimentation? It's also something we see a lot of technology leaders kind of, I guess, struggle with is experimentation versus stability. How do I give enough whilst, making sure everything runs reliably, stable?
Yeah, there is that kind of friction or that balance to have. So we have different teams, basically. We have, about 400 data scientists, both in research and applied, who have a free license to experiment. And then you have people more in my team who are there to make the product scale, make it reliable, not have much downtime and to be always on. And, just coming back to the point about, experimentation around innovation, I think a lot of people are finding it quite difficult at the moment because they've been told, here's sort of AI or Gen AI, whatever you want to, use, and then they're searching around for the problems to solve. And it doesn't really work so well like that. We believe it's far better to focus on the problem that needs to be solved first. Really understand the problem domain. And that's what we did with our accelerators. And which led us down to the fact that actually there's no good match in the commodity technology space for this problem. But by understanding the problem, you can build technology around it to embrace it. And that's probably a much better way to get true innovation. Focus on the problem, not the technology.
Yeah. Moving on to AI.
Favorite topic?
Love it. So you, Ben, have published research on neural networks and genetic algorithms way before the current AI wave that we live in. Is it the one that got away?
Well, actually, I think it's probably about 30 years ago. And at the time, I was fascinated, as you say, in neural networks and genetic algorithms, and also a bit of computer vision, trying to find esophageal cancer in ultrasounds. But it's funny, at the time we were talking about fuzzy logic, and you couldn't find a job in AI for love or money. And I think the problem was that it wasn't really taken seriously, AI, in the commercial world. It was very much in the academic world. And maybe I didn't help myself. I'm writing papers about fluffy logic instead of fuzzy logic. It's far more forgiving than fuzzy logic, but it's now we've come full spectrum where we're sort of dealing with what's currently been called sort of AI slop. There's so much AI, and not all of it is good AI.
Many of us argue if you had to eliminate 80% of AI projects, which would be the 20% that remain at kind of that large enterprise level?
That's a good question. I think I'd probably revert back to my earlier answer, which is I'd keep those projects where they hadn't started with a technology, they weren't given a brief to use a chat bot and go and find what you can do with it, but those which, started with a problem, really focus on problem to be solved, and then say, actually, AI can help do this.
It's interesting because I wanted to talk about this. You and I have been at a conference, or were at a conference in Barcelona recently, and we watched this lady do a keynote, Michelle Dickinson, and she talked about just not necessarily related to AI, but how we need to get back to solving real problems and not just chase doing things. And I feel like we see a lot of companies needing to do AI and have AI and apply AI without really understanding what the problem is that they're solving.
Totally.
And I guess, how do you, in Dunnhumby, separate genuine problem solving to solution chasing?
I'd say one of the first things to say about Dunnhumby is, we're not one of those companies that have just appended .ai onto our domain name or products. We've been doing AI for 30 years, and we're not chasing just the sort of the popular form of AI today, which is sort of Gen AI, in particular, over other types of AI. And I would like to quote my chief data officer from Dunnhumby, Sandy Stanley, where she presented this sort of following analogy. He said, think of a plate of of food, and you got your staples, you got your broccoli, you got your potatoes, all very good for you, and that, she said, represents the traditional AI models, be they deep neural networks, be they sort of k-means classifiers, whatever it is, the traditional AI which have been used in our products for many years. And then you have this bright, kind of slightly garish cupcake, and that is really the sort of it summarized up the sort of Gen AI phase. Yes, it looks very tempting. It looks really delicious. People are going to grab it much more often than they're going to grab the broccoli. But like with real cupcakes, if you grab this sort of generative AI cake, it's going to give you a sugar rush. But actually, a few hours later, it's going to be leaving you quite dissatisfied. So we find that, you have to have that balance between the staples and the sugar rush. So probably the best solutions are ones that are going to use traditional AI methods as a base to really look for patterns, signals from the data, but then maybe orchestrate in an agentic way or whatever, or bring together these data sources for a Gen AI user interface if that's how the user wants to interact it.
Mm-hmm.
We also, looked at the technology, or are looking at the technology. And, if you look at ChatGPT, what does the T stand for? The T stands for transformer. So we went back to the basic transformer technologies. And in the same way ChatGPT works by guessing the next most likely word to come after a previous word, we say, well, we can use that technology when we talk about products in a basket, a shopping basket. We can say, after these type of products, what's the next most associated product most likely to come? So this is some of the research we're currently doing, saying, can we get better propensity or associative models by using this technology compared to traditional technology? You'll be surprised in retail. Some of those associations, obviously there's obvious associations, but if I was to say to you, in a basket which contains baby formula, the obvious ones are going to be sort of nappies and sterilizers, but then the most next associated product in that basket would be
wine
and beer. Absolutely.
Would it be really?
Absolutely, because the sort of the hypothesis is that the parents who used to be going out to pubs and clubs and whatever suddenly been hit with a baby at home, suddenly can't go out to the local pub, so they have to drink at home to carry on their lifestyle or whatever it is. So it's sort of using that type of technology to say, based on what in your basket, what's the most likely basket item to come up? And where this shows up as being important is in things like, on Tesco, for example, have you forgotten? So you're about to check out. You don't want to, people are time poor generally. They don't want to be hit with offers which make no sense at all. I've done my shopping, but if you can demonstrate that you can add value by saying, actually, you've got all the great ingredients for a perfect curry, but you're missing this, then those personalized messages can land well. But it's a two-edged sword in a way. If you don't get the science right, then those personalized messages can actually be hindrance, and destroy loyalty. I don't know if you've ever bought a television in the past, high value purchase and not one you frequently buy, and then be hit, a week later with some coupons or some discount to go, here, have 15% off the same television you bought.
14-day return rate.
And it doesn't make you feel really good that you're now being hit with a coupon after you made a purchase. So you've got to apply the science intelligently and in the right way, and really understand the customer and not be focused on the product or what the retailer wants to shift.
And I guess it's interesting because a lot of us rush to shipping AI and technology in general quickly, right? It's the metric, like, let's get it out of the door faster, better, higher quality. But I guess what you just demonstrated in retail, I guess specifically, there's so much contextual nuance. We really have to be careful of how do you apply it versus operationalizing and when to and how to. Probably a lot more difficult and complex in retail in your world than it is probably somewhere else.
It is tricky. I mean, just to give one example, I think the best kind of personalization happens when you probably don't realize that you are being targeted as an individual personal. It's a little bit Big Brother, really, if you think about it. But did you realize that when you're watching, any kind of streaming platform, be it ITVX or Channel 4 at home on your television, that I think the latest study says about 30 to 70% of the adverts that you see, in between you're watching your Die Hard or whatever film it is, have been selected just for you based on your data. And that your neighbors who are watching the same film or your friends watching the same film are getting a different set of adverts based on their data. And that's probably an example where media is actually quite mature, because most people don't realize that they are being targeted. In that way, and it doesn't seem to be that obtrusive.
We hear a lot about this 25% failure rate of AI, Gen AI, most of the time. How do you mitigate for that? So obviously you have a lot of applied AI. What do you do about mitigation?
So I think the slightly flippant answer, I'll get on to the better answer in a minute. The slightly flippant Ferrari answer is, 25% failure rate of, generative AI sounds a lot. I don't think it applies to all AI. I think it's really that figures on generative AI. But then you have a look at what the human failure rate is. Humans also get it wrong. They also lie, manipulate the truth. So I think you need to look at the 25% in a context of a benchmark of a human. The second thing is quite a popular pattern which we've used is, I think it's called AI as a judge, where if you have a group, a small pool of models as your selected models to answer a particular type of question, and you can kind of basically load balance of round robin the different AI tasks to each of the models in turn, and then use a different set of prompts to say, okay, look, here was my question, here was the answer I got, and you ask each of the models to vote or to score the other model's work, basically. And so you're trying to, you can say, look, check it for tone, check it for racism or anything else you want to check for. And that way, you at least get this kind of voting model that actually there wasn't a massive hallucination, which might be an interesting quirk from one model, and the other models have spotted it as not being factually correct. What we found when doing that is there is model bias, as in each model has a tendency to rate their own answers the best over the other ones. Who knew? But again, by taking an average of scores of about 3 to 4 different models, you can actually improve the quality quite a lot.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, and at Dunnhumby, what would you say is your kind of hardest technology challenge at the moment? What are you trying to solve that gives you, not the headache, but
oh, so many to choose from. I think it's the time. Well, I would generalize as the time mismatch. I mean, historically, retail processing has been kind of like very kind of batch oriented. You get massive batch runs that process thousands of customers all at the same time, which works well for when you get when the retailer can send you the data only once a week. But when you are now in a different mode of operation, when you have a real life user doing what we call interactive queries, so not just getting a pre-made report or reading output, but the analysts are really digging into the data or the information, but saying, well, tell me about this, tell me about that. Do you see a correlation between organic soups versus whatever? And you have to do these interactive queries. That is a conversational dialogue, and the time constraints in a conversational dialogue is like if you're not replying within 2 to 3 seconds or 5 or 10 seconds of a maximum, then it's not going to work. It's going to feel very much like a monologue. So I think combining the traditional data processing and data mining with what's expected in terms of an AI interactive interface is quite a challenge.
How far are you away from that?
We've got some good prototypes, but when it comes to that, that reliability point. So yes, it works in the lab, but this is still quite far, I would say, from, so probably 5 or 6 months, I would say, between actually productionizing it and making it that industrial strength, a point earlier, that challenge between innovation and something that can always be trusted to give the right answer, not 25% of the time, because, that 25% error rate will become a problem if you don't solve it.
Yeah.
Even if it comes up to like sort of, 10 or 5%, because you just won't know which 5. It's like having a car that breaks down 5% of the time. Out of 100 journeys, only 5 are going to be miserable. But the problem is that you won't know which 5 are going to be miserable. So it erodes trust. It becomes quite corrosive.
And it goes back to, I guess, full circle to the reliability challenge
Exactly.
we talked about at the beginning. Ben, can I ask you to finish my sentence? The future of retail will belong to organizations that...
The future of retail will belong to organizations that put the customer at the heart of the decision making.
You talked about tracking people's profiles. We're talking about billions of transactions that you're dealing with at Dunnhumby. On a consumer side, we're always a bit skeptic about this. What are you doing with my data, my whereabouts, the personalization that's going on? And obviously, we're going more and more in that direction. Isn't it a bit like being part of Big Brother? How surely people talk about this, right?
Yes, and they do. And, we take people's data very, very seriously at Dunnhumby. I mean, I talked about the 2.1 billion profiles. We can recognize you. We don't know you in terms of your PII data. That's probably the first thing to say. The second thing is that, personalization. There's some really interesting other use cases, which I think probably holds more long-term benefits to the consumer. And that's when we use your data to find out things about your health and be able to help you with healthy living. One of the interesting studies was one led by Cancer Research with Imperial UCL, or Imperial College London, in 2023. And that was a study which involved loyalty data from Tesco and I believe Boots as well. And they were trying to see if there's any sort of customer or product-led signal for women that had early stages of ovarian cancer, which is a very vicious form of cancer if left untreated. And what they saw in a study of about 300 women, I believe, is that by picking up on these consumer buying habits of women that did have cancer, there was actually a really quite strong correlation between the products they bought. For example, they saw that, early stage ovarian cancer, the shopper, the buyer, the woman who didn't know she had cancer this stage was buying quite a lot of over-the-counter painkillers and also, quite interestingly, indigestion medicine. So and they hadn't been diagnosed at this stage by their doctors or whatsoever. And so there's this kind of correlation between the symptoms that the poor lady was feeling and the way she was trying to mask it by buying these products. And I think the results saying that they could detect these signals in the buying habits between 8 months before any diagnosis, or on average about 4 to 5 months before the GP had picked up on them. So I think when people start seeing and, that you can offer this type of health advice based on the loyalty data, that might change some of the skeptics. It won't by any means. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think, according to some surveys I've seen, about 52% of people are happy for you to use loyalty data to make suggestions about health. So I'd say there's some interesting sparks, but it's not completely there yet.
It's interesting because I think as consumers, we like personalization and relevance, but yet there's so much rejection of taking my data, observing me as a customer. And I think we have not necessarily, or the industry doesn't have necessarily connected that those two in a more positive sense, as you just mentioned. And I really think there's quite a long way to go still for the industry to do that and to make us feel a bit more comfortable
Absolutely.
as consumers.
And I think the key to this is, well, the pivot point, if you like, is by really putting the customer at the heart of the equation.
Yeah.
What is it in it for them, not the retailer? It's not a chance to sell more over-the-counter medicine, but it's the ability to tell something really quite important to that shopper at the moment that really matters. And whilst, marketing companies or retailers do not put the customer at the center of it, I think that skepticism will continue, and kind of, in a way, rightly so.
Ben, in every episode, we ask our guests, I guess, for the next business and technology leader, if you could pick one piece of advice that you would have loved to get early on in your career, which you can share now, do you have one that you would
That's
share?
a very good question. I think, if I was talking to a younger version of myself, I would say, stick with your passion. I should have probably stuck with AI, even if nobody else wanted to read my my papers on fluffy algorithms.
AI and motorbikes?
AI and motorbikes. Yes, I should have stuck with my passion. Do something that interests you. Make your workplace fun. Get your teams to do fun stuff, because we learn better. Coming back to plagiarizing shamelessly, Dr. Michelle Dickinson, saying the way that people learn best is through having fun. And then what you learn from that, you can apply in the real world. So stick to your passion, stick to what, makes the time fly.
And the last question, because I have to ask, are you going to Tesco or Tesco's?
With yes, Tesco. Absolutely.
Lovely. Great to have you. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you very much for having me.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in.